Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM from Monday, December 2nd. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, Sunday night, the White House announced that Joe Biden had granted a universal pardon of his son Hunter for any federal crime committed over a time period that spans more than a decade. All this after the president famously on numerous occasions promised not to pardon Hunter. So, Tom, were you surprised that the president reversed his pledge? And what do you make of the reaction so far?
I cannot say that I am surprised. I do think it's a disgrace. I mean, that he swore up and down to the American people that he would respect the justice system, that he would not pardon his son. Karine Jean-Pierre said it from the podium a number of times, and yet here we are, and now that the election's over and it didn't go his way, suddenly he's coming out. I also think, listen, if you read some of the headlines on this, it says, oh, he's pardoned for the gun crime and the tax evasion. No. This is, as you mentioned, a blanket pardon for everything that every known and unknown crime, federal crime he may have committed from 2014, which is when he started taking money from Burisma, all the way through December 1st, 2024. So it is about as broad, and we have a story on the site this morning from Betsy Woodruff Swan at Politico talking about how nearly unprecedented this is for a private citizen to get this kind of broad immunity and pardon. It's akin to what Gerald Ford gave Richard Nixon back in the day. We just don't see that given to private citizens, but Hunter Biden got it. So look, I think it's a disgrace, and I think it's another broken promise by Joe Biden, and the fact that they would come out and just try and kind of try and pass it off as this suddenly he changed his mind and he was telling the truth before is also just, it's in line with everything that we've seen from this administration in terms of just straight up gaslighting the American people.
Well, Carl, the argument is that Hunter would face prosecution or persecution, I guess, by a Trump-run Justice Department. In fact, Hunter's lawyer submitted to Joe Biden this lengthy brief. It was entitled "The Political Persecution of Hunter Biden." Reason part, with the election now decided, the threat against Hunter is real. So what about that argument that Biden just changed his mind because Trump won the White House?
It doesn't, I'll never know, but my guess is that Biden didn't change his mind, that he was doing maybe a Clinton-esque thing. He said, I wouldn't pardon him. Maybe he expected Kamala Harris to pardon him. That's the only thing I can think of, because the facts haven't changed insofar as Hunter Biden's case is concerned. And he was convicted of this gun charge. He was going on trial. He was going to face time probably for income tax evasion. The statement that the president released Sunday night said that he would never. He kind of went full Trump, and with a dash of Eric Adams thrown in. The prosecution was, it was a renegade prosecution. It was a lawless FBI. It was a special prosecutor and judge and jury. They're lawfare, and in this case, though, it's worth thinking about for a moment what he's saying. That gun charge that Hunter Biden was convicted on. He said he was not a drug addict when he filled out the form. He was. His wife got rid of the gun within a day or two. He never used it in a crime. He never used it as far as we know. That case would not have been prosecuted against anyone else. In that sense, Joe Biden's right. But it was part of this rogue operation that Hunter Biden had, in which he'd been trading on his father's name for years. And he said, well, he would never have, a normal person who committed crimes like this because he was a drug addict would never. No, I've never heard, I covered courts for many years. I never heard of a case of a person avoiding prosecution for income tax evasion of millions of dollars because they use drugs. Those two things don't really have much to do with each other. And, Paul Manafort who was charged eerily, who committed the same crimes as Hunter Biden, apparently. With the same country, Ukraine. He was trading, he was doing influence peddling and then hiding the profits. Manafort went to prison while Biden was president. And the real question you ask is, if Hunter Biden wasn't the son of the president, would he have made millions of dollars for Burisma? No, he wouldn't have. He doesn't speak Ukrainian. He has no energy experience. He would never have been on that board any more than you or I would have been, Andy or Tom. He traded on his father's name for to make untold millions of dollars. And then when he gets caught violating the law, says, "Oh, but they wouldn't even go after me if I wasn't the son." So I agree with Tom. I was in favor of a pardon for Hunter Biden. I was hoping Donald Trump would do it. I would have liked if Kamala Harris won the election, I would have hoped President Harris would have done it. I would have assumed President Biden would have done it until he said over and over and over again that he wouldn't.
Why should he be pardoned, Carl?
I think for this country, I think this country should move past this lawfare. I think the Republicans may have to show more grace than has been shown to them. Look, this is my view. It doesn't matter because he's now been pardoned. Trump can't pardon him twice. But there was something in the statement about Hunter Biden's lawyer is right. I mean, Kash Patel and these people that Trump's been appointing and Trump himself have been saying it. Now we're going to go after the FBI. Now we're going to start criminal prosecutions of people who use lawfare against us. And so instead of forbearance and showing grace and trying to get back to normalcy, there's a sense, at least among Democrats, that the Biden administration, the incoming Trump administration is going to escalate, is going to do more lawfare. And this is the excuse that President Biden used to pardon his son. But now it's clear to me, at least, that he was planning to do this. He was planning to have Kamala Harris do it when he lost the election. He was going to do it. And what he was saying before was just not untrue.
Can we spend just a little more time on this statement that Biden released? Because it is so full of ridiculousness. He talks about this plea deal that was struck. He said this carefully negotiated plea deal with the Justice Department, and had that held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's cases. Well, it unraveled in open court when the judge started asking questions about it, and basically uncovered that it was this broad, immunity that had been agreed to sort of in private, and they tried to slip it in there and get it by the judge, and it didn't happen. So that was absurd. And then the other thing, and this just absolutely just my jaw dropped, and it just makes your blood boil. He said, "For my entire career, I followed a simple principle: just tell the American people the truth. They'll be fair-minded." I mean, he's lying about lying. He can't even tell the
he's
truth.
lying about telling the truth. Actually,
it's just. I mean, look, if I had hair, I would yank it out. It's so frustrating.
Well,
it was also whiny on top of all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was struck by the blanket nature of it and the duration of the, it's over 10 years, I guess 11 years. It really is an extraordinary moment when you give this kind of a pardon. I think the only other pardon close to this was Gerald Ford's pardon of Nixon. So it's pretty sweeping, and it does. I mean, Carl, everything you said may be true, but he has insisted for over a year now that he was not going to do this, and he got on his high horse about it. And it just either he had a real change of heart or he was lying all along. I'll leave it to listeners.
But Andy,
to decide.
if he had a change of heart, the statement wouldn't have read like this. I'm with Tom on this. That statement was so tenditious. If he'd had a change of heart, he would have said something like this. I spent Thanksgiving with my son. I love my son. I lost a daughter. I lost my other son, my only other son. I know I said I wouldn't pardon him, but I can't bear the thought of Hunter in prison. And you can think of me what you want, American people, but I'm going to pardon him. I know I said I wouldn't, but I'm going to. I would have accepted that and respected it personally. I would have liked it.
Yeah.
But he didn't do that.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the program. I've got Miranda Devine coming on, who really wrote the book on this. She, among other things, she wrote the Laptop from Hell. So I'm curious to get her take on it. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We'll be back in a minute. We're going to talk about Kash Patel, who might be the person who convinced Biden to change his mind. We'll find out. Don't go away. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl Cannon and Tom Bevan. So related to this Biden decision, at least in the minds of some Democrats, is the nomination of Kash Patel as FBI director. Here is Kash Patel on the Sean Ryan show talking about the FBI just a little while ago.
The FBI's footprint has gotten so freaking big. And the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops. You're cops. Go be cops. Go chase down murderers and rapists and drug dealers and violent offenders.
Carl, good advice?
Well, I'm torn because I've been saying that for years myself, in a slightly different context. The FBI is not actually necessarily supposed to, chase down violent criminals. That's state law, but but the agency has gotten too large.
You have advocated on this very program that you would shut down the FBI.
I did never
office in DC. Right?
Yes, but I didn't.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. But just a slight clarification. I didn't say turn the building into a museum for the deep state. I would prefer it would be turned into a museum for celebrating the First Amendment. And there used to be
raise it to the ground and then rebuild it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Look, I don't want to deny it because it's on tape. Yeah. I did look. That's right. And that agency needs an overhaul. In the short term, Christopher Wray was appointed by Trump. The FBI director is a thing that's bedeviled him. James Comey didn't want to be fired by Trump. And so, he played these games and he said, I don't do weasel things, but he did a number of weasel things, including run out to his car after talking with Trump and write down what he says Trump said and then leak it to New York Times so he could get a special prosecutor hired. It's kind of weaselly, you might say. Anyway, then he appoints Christopher Wray. That Republicans have been disappointed in him. Not all Republicans, but some Republicans. Trump world, MAGA world has been disappointed in Christopher Wray. I don't know enough. I don't cover the agency anymore. I don't know enough to say. It's not normally considered like that. A president comes in and just gets a new FBI director, but I guess we're in the new world of norms. I guess that's one. But Kash Patel seems like more like a political activist, than the kind of person who's led the FBI in the past. But what Trump would say is that the FBI has been led astray. And it's time for a change of direction. So,
Tom, what do you make of the pick?
I mean, it's another, sort of Trump special, right? He doesn't have any experience. He's not a former agent. And, some people say, well, you need a former agent to lead that organization and someone that the current agents would respect, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe there's some truth to that, but maybe there's some truth to the fact that you need an outsider in there to go in who hasn't been part of that culture to break it up and to break things and reform it. And that falls in line with a number of Trump's other picks. And I think Kash Patel, look, he seems to be, raising the ire of all the usual suspects, right? From Morning Joe to the Washington Post editorial page to others. And in my mind, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, again, proof will be in the pudding. Let's see how it goes. But I don't have a problem with him. I don't think he's a threat to the agency, a threat to democracy, some sort of, as he's being portrayed in the media. I mean, I agree with Carl. I mean, he's definitely he's a loyalist. He's an activist. I mean, he is a guy who has been very outspoken on the deep state and the FBI and some of these other agencies. And so, maybe his bark is worse than his bite, or maybe he's actually going to get in there and actually do some stuff. And again, maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing.
Well, real quick, Andy, on Tom's point, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but the FBI, what he's talking about there is the FBI, these FBI lawyers were leaving the FBI and going and embedding themselves in Twitter and basically threatening Twitter while they were in the FBI, and then doing the FBI's bidding when they left the FBI and Twitter to censor conservative opinion, to censor even independent thinking, libertarian thinking, Reason Magazine thinking. I mean, and so there was all of this extraneous activity going on and that's, we should define this. When conservatives say deep state, that liberals, Democrats get mad about that, but that's what they're talking about. And there is evidence that the FBI had become, it was always a politicized organization since its start. It began as a politicized organization. Under J. Edgar Hoover, it was for 50 years, but it still is. And what Kash Patel is talking about is trying to get that element out of that agency and concentrate on protecting Americans from, transnational crime, domestic crime that crosses state borders, more of a law enforcement function and less of a political function.
Which is interesting because what he's being accused of is being a guy who's going to politicize the agency on Donald Trump's behalf and use it to exact vengeance and all that.
Okay. But to be fair, he did tell Steve Bannon this. He said, and this is a quote, "We're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. We'll figure that out." Carl, that's got to give you some pause, right?
It's irresponsible and threatening and disqualifying. I'm not a fan of this appointment, even though he and I share a goal of reforming the FBI.
It's funny because Kash Patel wrote a book called Gangster Government, and where he talked about the government using sort of the heavy hand of the deep state. That sounded kind of like a gangster,
right? Yeah. It was very right out of The Godfather. But hey, I want to
you know what? It was out of Harold Robbins' The Adventurers, where the protagonist, he finally overthrows this corrupt government, and then the last scene, and it's demoralizing. In the last page of the book, he's hired the head of the secret police for his own government, for the reform government. So
well, there's this other story I want to talk about. It's about Al Sharpton and the Harris campaign. It's starting to pick up some steam. Apparently, their FEC filings for the campaign show two $250,000 donations to Sharpton's foundation. It's called the National Action Network. And that was followed by a rather pleasant appearance by the candidate on MSNBC. MSNBC claims that they had no idea that this contribution had been made, but $500,000 is a lot of money. And Carl, what do you make of the story? It sounds like checkbook journalism.
Well, yeah, it doesn't sound like journalism at all, does it? Al Sharpton, I've seen stories, and I don't know if this is true, that he gets $1.5 million, from MSNBC in his salary, that he gets $1 million from his own charity. The New York Post reported that 5 or 6 years ago. For a man,
guy's got to live, Carl. Come on, $2.5 million.
For a man of the cloth, he's doing well.
Yeah. Well, I actually went and looked at the 990s. Those are the forms that you have to, if you have a nonprofit, you have to fill them out. And so I can tell you that National Action Network paid Sharpton $375,000 in 2022. There's expenses in there for private jets and limousine services. His 3 daughters are on the payroll there for about $160,000, $170,000 combined. So it is he's
a good family man.
He's a good family man. It's about an $8 million annual burn rate that they have there. But I think, Tom, if Carl and I did this and came to you and said, hey, we just got paid $500,000, we're going to do a fair and balanced interview, you might have a question or two.
Might have a question. Well, I mean, and that's really the story, isn't it? Right? So he takes this money. Fine. MSNBC says, well, okay, we didn't know anything about it, but you know about it now. And what have you done?
Yeah.
Nothing. They haven't fired him. They haven't suspended him. They haven't reprimanded him. They've done nothing to this guy. Even after we learned, and I don't know if he's admitted it yet or not, but we certainly have, the reporting has borne out that he received $500,000 in advance of doing an interview with a presidential candidate. It is It's a disgrace. And the guy should no longer be allowed to work at that network or any other network. If that's how, if he wants to go do that and he can be on his own and do a podcast or whatever, and that's how he wants to play the game, that's fine. But if MSNBC had any integrity or scruples or anything, they wouldn't let him back on air. But
and Carl, they have
there every day.
Yeah, they have suspended other hosts for making political contributions of a couple $1,000s here and there. And
this is why the contribution went the other way.
Right. Oh, okay.
And it was a lot bigger than $2,000.
Yeah.
Tom, if this reporting is accurate, if this is actually what happened, it's hard to think of anything in American political journalism like it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, the FEC filings are pretty black and white. And then the 990s are black and white as well. I mean,
I know, Andy, what I'm saying there, and I don't know the details, is, what were their associated costs? Or did Sharpton pocket this money personally, or were these production costs, travel costs? I need to know more about it, but obviously,
I mean, this
is not.
I need 2.5.
It's not journalism. Wait. It's not journalism at all.
Okay.
This is
okay.
Can we please do away with I'm Oprah and I didn't get paid, but my production company got $2.5 million to set up this event. I mean, give me a break.
Tom, there are overhead costs to these things.
Overhead. I actually find that. I think you can defend that. I mean, she was not presenting that. That was an infomercial she was doing for a client. She might have disclosed that she was being paid, but this wasn't a network who.
I agree with that. Oprah's her own thing, and that's fine. She wasn't, but I mean, clearly she got paid. I mean, let's not split hairs about that and say, $2.5 million to produce an infomercial. I mean, it didn't cost her $2.5 million to do that. It goes to her company. I mean, that's ridiculous. Right. But I agree with you. It's completely different when you have a contributor to a network. I mean, imagine if someone, how the rest of the media would react if this
Tucker Carlson had taken money
someone at Fox
Trump.
News take a $500,000. I mean, they would be absolutely beside themselves. But we don't hear anything since it's Al Sharpton and MSNBC.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, guys. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk to Miranda Devine of the New York Post about Hunter Biden and the pardon. And later in the broadcast, Tom's going to be here with Phil Wegman talking about what's going on at the White House. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined now by Miranda Devine. She is a columnist at the New York Post and the author of the book Laptop from Hell. Miranda, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
So you have this new piece out in the Post today saying that this was, quote, the least surprising news of the decade. I'm talking, of course, about the pardon, but a lot of people have questioned the timing of it. It seems to many to have come earlier than other presidential pardons. Why do you think Joe Biden did it now?
Well, I think it's pure and simple because Hunter Biden was due to be sentenced in Delaware on the gun charges in about 11 days. And then a few days later in California on the tax fraud charges. And so I guess he wanted to preempt the sentencing, which, if you look at average guidelines, he was up for, something like 3 years jail on the tax and maybe something similar on the guns.
So he said he wouldn't pardon him, of course, and he said he wouldn't commute a sentence either. Do you think he always planned on pardoning Hunter, or was this a last-minute change of heart?
Oh, yes, he always planned on it. And that was the only way that you can see Hunter Biden and his lawyers' sort of reckless tactics legally. And I think, the only surprise to me is that anyone is surprised that Joe Biden would lie. What this whole saga has taught me is that Joe Biden lies all the time about everything and always has. And so lying about whether he would pardon his son or not is just par for the course.
Do you think, though, he thought, well, if Kamala Harris wins, then I won't have to do the pardon, and he was sort of caught up short on this? And I do want to ask you about this, because you had great reporting about what the Biden's weekend in Nantucket was like, including them going to a restaurant called the Den of Thieves, which is, I mean, you couldn't write that, could you?
Thieves. Yes, you couldn't make it up.
So did anything happen in the last 48 hours that would have changed Biden's mind on any of this?
No, look, that's the narrative that's being spun from the White House, and that various gullible souls at CNN and MSNBC have swallowed hook, line, and sinker. That, Joe Biden, honest Joe, a man of his word, my word as a Biden, was determined not to pardon Hunter. But then over the Thanksgiving weekend, he decided that he had to protect his son because he saw this outrageous 52-page document released by Hunter's lawyers that claimed that Hunter was the victim of, political persecution, that the prosecution was driven by Joe Biden's enemies. And in fact, in Joe Biden's statement on Sunday night, he alludes to that. I mean, he uses much of the same language. He says, my son, was only prosecuted like this because he's my son, and anybody similar would not receive anything like this. And, that's the story. And I guess you can't blame him for trying it, but I think you'd have to be a complete fool to fall for any of it. Hunter Biden certainly was singled out and given different treatment from any other American, but it was favorable treatment. You just have to listen to the two IRS whistleblowers, Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler, who testified to Congress about that 5-year investigation in Delaware into Hunter Biden, run by David Weiss, then the U.S. attorney and now the special counsel, and to hear their terrible tales about obstruction and slow walking, the Department of Justice protecting Joe Biden, refusing to allow them to follow any evidence trail that led to the president himself. And there was plenty of it. And they were not allowed to, for instance, get search warrants for a cottage on Joe Biden's property that Hunter Biden had been living in. They weren't allowed to geolocate phones when Hunter Biden claimed in a WhatsApp shakedown message to one of his Chinese partners that his father was sitting next to him and was wanting to know where the money was, and that would punish them if they didn't provide it straight away. Other search warrants, the prosecutors tipped off Hunter Biden's lawyers. And then this all culminated in this outrageous sweetheart deal for Hunter, where he was going to, get off with a slap on the wrist, not even that, which all fell apart in court. But it fell apart, and then Hunter was charged only because the IRS whistleblowers had come forward and disrupted those cozy little plans between the Department of Justice and Hunter Biden's lawyers.
Right. So I'm talking with Miranda Devine of the New York Post. She's the author of the book Laptop from Hell, which deals with part of the Hunter Biden saga, which I guess will continue here. What about other Biden family members? Does this have any implications for Jim Biden or any other people who might get caught up in congressional investigations?
Look, I think it's a pretty fair bet that Joe Biden will pardon Jim Biden, and he'll probably do it in the usual timing, the last day or two of his presidency before January 20.
But he hasn't been charged with anything, but he will just give him a blanket pardon, you think?
Well, he's being investigated, and that's been going on for a very long time. And he was involved in a lot of Hunter Biden's exploits, the influence peddling that was going on in China, some of those China deals. He wasn't involved in Ukraine, but there was enough there, I think, for Joe Biden. And there's no political stigma for him because he's already, blown the stack on Hunter. And he's given Hunter not just a pardon, but a pardon back 11 years. This is unprecedented. It is the most...
And it's for everything. It's for crimes that he hasn't even been accused of, correct? I mean, it's just anything he did in the last 10 years, he's off, right?
Everything. And that
Wow.
includes includes, I mean, he's gone back not 10 years, but curiously 11 years. And that's because in April of 2014 was when the whole Ukraine grift began, when Hunter was paid $1 million a year for serving on the board of that corrupt energy company, Burisma, in Ukraine.
So, as a journalist who's followed the Biden saga, as I said, and wrote about it in the New York Post and wrote about it in your book, what do you think this tells us, if anything, about Joe Biden's legacy? Do you think it'll taint him in any way, or do you think it's just, boy, here's a guy who stood up for his son in his son's hour of need?
Look, I think it can't help but tarnish his legacy. I mean, his legacy should already be so tattered that there's impossible to shine at all. But there still are people hanging on to the belief that he's Honest Joe and a good family man and, high, decent and high moral standards. But I think this is just so on brand for Joe Biden that it's impossible to see it in any other way but as corrupt and as a protection for himself, because, of course, he was involved in that influence peddling. The more important issue, I think, though, is the cover-up by the deep state, and that is probably, regardless of pardons, what you will see the new Trump administration going after, because that really is a threat to the Republic, having the CIA and the DOJ and the FBI and the IRS and the State Department all colluding to censor stories that were derogatory about Joe Biden, like ours in the Hunter Biden laptop story just before the 2020 election. That was a letter written by the 51 former intelligence officials, most of them CIA. That really was a domestic election interference operation by the CIA, because you had the then CIA director, Gina Haspel, sign off on that letter, give it the green light, allow it to be published just 2 weeks before the election. And specifically, it was created for the purpose of getting Joe Biden off the hook during his last debate with Donald Trump. So I think that investigating all of that corruption of those institutions and those security agencies is probably the priority for Trump.
And in terms of those investigations, as I understand it, I'd love your view on this. By receiving this pardon, Hunter Biden cannot plead the fifth in a congressional investigation, so that if he's called to testify against his father, he cannot sort of step aside and say, I can't do that because I might incriminate myself, because he can't incriminate himself. I mean, is that true, first of all? And is it possible that Biden will do a whole bunch of other pardons of people in the Justice Department in order to sort of quell any further investigation?
Mm-hmm. Look, I'm not sure on the latter that he can really do that. But I mean, he'd have to identify people like Lisa Monaco or whoever that he thinks have done the wrong thing. I mean, if you accept a pardon, you're admitting guilt. So I'm not sure that would happen. And as for Hunter not being able to plead the fifth, or say that he needs immunity from prosecution, I think he's still not immune from state prosecution. So
right.
I think he'd very likely be able to claim that. I mean, the Bidens are nothing if not slippery.
Well, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Miranda Devine of the New York Post. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Phil Wegman. He is our White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Phil, good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. So obviously, Phil, let's talk about the sort of bombshell news that broke last night, which is the pardon of Hunter Biden. I noticed that, so Karine Jean-Pierre did a gaggle on Air Force One today, and it seemed like, first of all, tell our listeners what a gaggle is. How many reporters were there? I only heard a couple of voices. Like, what is that? It's not your typical, obviously, full White House. This is on the plane. How many people are part of that gaggle?
So this is a little bit of inside baseball, but during that gaggle, while the president is traveling overseas to Africa for an international visit, there's probably maybe 10 or 15 reporters thereabouts, as opposed to a normal White House press briefing where you've got the entire press corps, 49 reporters sitting in each of those blue chairs, and it's on camera. That's the big difference here. The first we're hearing from the Biden White House after President Biden did something that he told us he wasn't going to do. First we're hearing from them is while the president is on Air Force One headed to a different continent, and it's not on camera. Instead, we have only the audio. It certainly seems, a cynic could conclude that they dropped this news on a Sunday night and then they got out of town.
Well, and you can't tell who the reporters who are asking the questions aren't identified. They obviously pressed her on this issue and whether the Justice Department is politicized, etc. But look, in my opinion, listening to that gaggle, I would have thought there would have been more sort of outrage directed at her because she's the one who stood there day after day after day, and you posted a clip. You asked her. I think a lot of reporters in that room had asked her over time whether she was going to whether the president was going to pardon his son, commute his sentences, any number of things, and the answer was always no, 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 until it wasn't no, which was the other day. And she tried to finesse that. She kept referring back to his statement and said, look, he made this decision this weekend, blah, blah, blah. But there's really nothing different about, what was going on then versus now. I'm just curious, Phil, as to the timing also. I mean, why would he not wait till the very end on his way out the door as opposed to doing it now?
So the speculation about the timing is that Hunter Biden is likely to be sentenced in this case sooner rather than later. So instead of waiting until January 19th, or as the movers are packing up his personal effects from the Oval Office, President Biden decided now was the time that he was going to go back on his word. He was going to pardon his son. And let's talk about this pardon, by the way. It is very much the definition of a blanket pardon. It starts in 2014 when, surprise, surprise, Hunter Biden was in business with Burisma, one of these Ukrainian companies overseas, as well as numerous others. And it runs all the way until December 1st, 2024. That is about a decade. Some folks have noted that it's longer than the pardon that Ford offered Nixon. But if we just take a step back, I think on a human level, all of us can say, if our child was in this type of peril, of course we would pardon him. Of course we would show justice and, show, some generosity there. In this case, that's not the issue. It's not a question of a father looking out for his son. It's a question of why did the president repeatedly tell us that he wasn't going to do this? I mean, you noted it, Tom. Biden said to the press he wouldn't do this. The White House told all of us repeatedly that he wasn't going to do this. And then when there's no political consequences, when there's no votes to be lost over this, he immediately does what he said he wouldn't. And so you've got to ask, what value can you put in a Biden promise? The president often says that he gives his word as a Biden. Well, in this case, it's not worth the paper that his legacy will be printed on.
So president still has, he's obviously overseas for this trip, but he will be back and he still has 2 months left in office. I assume, Phil, will there be some sort of press conference, final press conference, exit, press conference? I think most presidents give one of those as their time in office winds down. Or is there any way that, you, meaning the press corps, will be able to question him directly about this and try and get him to explain himself more, and also get him to talk about why he decided to go back on his promise, his repeated promise? Is there anything on the books for that, or do you expect that?
I certainly hope so, because what we heard from Biden in making this announcement is that he believes that his son had been unfairly targeted by the Department of Justice, that things got political. And he sounded a little bit like Donald Trump when he was making that argument. But there needs to be some pushback here. There needs to be a question of, if this was in fact politicized, what do you make of the fact that there are whistleblowers who have said that the FBI slow walked this investigation into Hunter Biden, that there are whistleblowers who said that the FBI waited until the statute of limitations expired. That's got to be addressed. Another thing that has to be addressed is this reporting that we're hearing now from NBC News and others, that when the president was saying over the summer that a pardon was off the table, he was telling his advisors in private that it was very much a possibility. So how is he going to square that circle? I've got to say, though, after attending a lot of press briefings with this president, he certainly isn't as accessible as his predecessor, but more often than not, he gets himself into trouble. And I think that as he's looking to his legacy, there's going to be a little consternation among the people who surround him, because the two big career-defining promises of this president in 2024 were, first, that he wasn't going to step aside, and then he did that. And now the second is his flip-flop on the pardon. So there's a lot of questions for him to ask. I'm not certain he's ready to, perhaps take the risk of facing the press.
We're speaking with Phil Wegman. He's White House reporter for RealClearPolitics. Phil, we got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about Biden and what he hopes to accomplish over the next 2 months that he has in office, basically. If you read the press, you'll hear and see that his administration is trying to Trump-proof some of his legacy items and make sure that, whether they're doing it through executive order or regulatory action, that they're trying to make sure that some of these accomplishments that he has had are protected from Donald Trump just walking in there and undoing them. What do we know about what Biden wants to do over the next couple of months before he leaves the White House for good?
The president wants to avoid the nickname that he's a lame duck. Like all presidents obviously want to avoid that. But the fact of the matter is, it's exactly what he is currently. There's no appetite in Congress to do a big push at the last minute. For the most part, the legislative business is wrapped up. They can look to different executive actions and orders to, set up speed bumps for Donald Trump when he comes into office. But, what I was struck by over the weekend is that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau comes to the United States and he flies to Mar-a-Lago to have dinner with President-elect Donald Trump to discuss trade deals and the threat of tariffs. He doesn't even bother to, maybe turn his plane around and head to, the Biden family home where they're celebrating Thanksgiving. He doesn't even make any scheduling change to maybe show up at the White House. For the most part, world leaders are signaling that when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to international business, they know that Biden doesn't really have a seat at the table in any meaningful way. And so they're turning their focus to Donald Trump. And I think that overall, that's what Washington, D.C. is doing.
All right, we will leave it there. Phil Wegman, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Andy and Carl, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Good night.